Well, gentlemen, in the timely words of Vladimir Lenin, there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen. And I think that we can all safely say that we've just lived through a couple decades this past month. So with that, welcome back to the New Columbia Movement YouTube channel. My name is Sean. Thank you again for joining us for another monthly roundtable. I know we didn't get to do these too often, but certainly there's plenty of material to go over this month that we really couldn't avoid not talking about it. So thank you again for joining us. Tonight, I am joined by three of our most distinguished intellects of the New Columbia Movement to talk about all the things that have gone on this month and kind of explore where we're going to go from here. So gentlemen, welcome to you. We'll go around the board. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and tell us what your advice is for tonight, and we'll go from there. Adam, let's start with you.
All right, my name is Adam. I'm with the Northeast chapter of the NCM. I am drinking some Highland Park 12 this evening. Not quite as good as my go-to Ardbeg 10, but it's still enjoyable.
Excellent. What you got, Micah?
Smoking some Peterson Nightcap and sipping on some strawberry milk.
Strawberry milk. That's a strong combo. It's a strong combo.
Pretty good.
What you got going down there, Gino?
My name's Gino, and no liquor or smoke for me. I'm inside, keeping hydrated, drinking water, and then I also have nicotine pouches as well. I've been particularly fond of Tucker Carlson's brand as well. So that's pretty much what I got. Keeps me focused, keeps the cognition moving at full speed.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, gentlemen, again, thank you for joining me tonight. So we were going over before we hit record here on just all the things that we were going to talk about for this past month. And then I realized that I was going to have to start taking notes because of just how much happened. It really is like decades happening within weeks. So we're going to kind of try to take it a little bit in order here as best we can. Conversation will go where it does, but there's just so much to address. And I think it all ultimately it ties into the larger cultural conversation that we're having about trend directions, the trajectory of our nation, our country, where we're headed, what's next, how we got here. And so much of this month has just been emblematic of all of that. I mean, it's really been wrapped up into one big postcard of really where we are at a certain period in time. So we're going to kind of, I want to start back in the end of August because it wasn't September when it happened, but it really kind of trailed into September before the next major event sidelined us. But we had the shooting by a transgender individual at the Catholic Church in Minneapolis. This was obviously a horribly tragic event. The shooter had journals and manifestos and everything to accompany the actions of what they did. And the follow-on was just a lot of cover up, I want to say, from both the left and the right, but really not addressing the issue, I think, like we want it to. I've always been an advocate of saying that transgenderism is a real mental illness. If you tap into the spiritual side of things, I look at transgenderism and I see genuine demonic forces at play. If you look at just some of the drawings and the things that were being written in this quote unquote manifesto, there was literally pictures of this individual having a conversation with himself in a mirror, but the mirror was reflecting a demon. So, you know, I'm sure many of you have seen it, and if you haven't, please go and watch it. But the movie Nefarious, I feel like I've referenced this a lot this past month. It's really a tremendous movie. It's a psychological thriller if you like that kind of thing. But go and watch it if you haven't, because it's going to be so timely to watch it now. And really just to kind of reimagine the world in the spiritual lens that it exists. Whether or not somebody like this individual was possessed, the types of things that are motivating these actions are, I struggle to say that they can just be reduced to some chemical imbalance in the brain. And I think this was the discussion we were having at the time when it first happened, is there are real malicious, malevolent forces at play in this world that are driving people to do all of these things that have really happened in the last month. I wish we could say we had a full news cycle of events that were all positive this month, but we really didn't. I mean, it's just been tragedy after tragedy. And there's a singular, motivated, malicious force behind all of these things that I think is driving this, that we have to be very aware of. And I think that perhaps this Minneapolis shooter, was it William Robinson? I got to look the name up real quick because I'm blanking on the name right now. Was motivated by that, whether, through direct possession or through just acting on the impulses of sin. And so that's kind of where I want to steer this conversation tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to you guys and hear your feedback on it. But the manifestation of malice in the world is really what has been most shocking to see this past month.
Well, I mean, if you look at this event specifically from a bird's eye view, you couldn't come up with a more stereotypical sounding incident. You have a transgender individual, the documented cases of their descent into mania and deep sinfulness, the ties to a satanic organization, the hatred that fuels them to go and shoot children at a mass. I mean, that is it. That's the culmination of everything that people like us are trying to push against. That's the forces that exist in society. I mean, I don't know. It's really on the nose, I mean, it feels like it's almost a caricature of the kinds of events that we've seen. And this is not the first incident of a transgender individual shooting up a Christian school. I'm sad to say that I'm sure it won't be the last, but it's alarming because it seems like these things are going to become more common, and this feels like the inevitable end of the transgender train. You have a bunch of people that have been lied to and deceived. They're steeped in this sinful and this psychologically damaging mindset, and I think for a lot of these people, there is no way out, and that's why the suicide rates in the transgender community is so high, because it's not a lifestyle. It's not, oh, well, they just make different choices than us. These people are deeply diseased. They have a serious issue. And instead of a healthy society that encourages them to seek treatment and find Christ so they could find some sort of peace with themselves, that we have a society that indulges them. And the problem with indulging these kinds of things is that this is, like I said, this is the inevitable end. Regrettably, sadly, rest in peace, those souls that perished.
It is. I mean, it is precisely that. It's the indulgence, and this is what's frustrated so many people, is that it's one thing for tragedy to exist. It's another thing for this tragedy to be. I mean, again, just going back to what I was saying, there's been so many back-to-back tragedies in this last month. It's because of a system of decisions that have been made over the past several decades that has created an atmosphere of allowance for this kind of stuff to happen, right? There's been conversation recently about like bringing back the insane asylums because of the stabbing on the metro that we'll get into. We're starting to try to get ahead of ourselves, to get too smart for ourselves, to try to rationalize away what these problems really are and not addressing them. We want to live at this like end of history, liberal democracy, rose-colored lens view of the world, where we believe everything can just be addressed and fixed with the proper argument, with the proper medication, the proper diagnosis, the proper conversation. And the reality is sometimes there's just big issues that can't be rectified, so they have to be mitigated. And we're not mitigating these. We've got DAs and judges who are being extremely light on sentencing for criminals who are bound or who are more than likely to commit offenses again, which we've seen. We've got this encouragement of mental illness, which is manifested through transgenderism and a number of other things. Transgenderism is the most obvious. When you actually go to destroy your own identity, you can't be a healthy human person. But it manifests in lesser ways too, that we're indulging, we're allowing, we're encouraging, we're systematically enabling. Many of these states are proposing things like not allowing their parents to have a say in the kids' transition, whether it's a physical transition or not, within the public school system. So you have all these things that are happening. There's actually enabling this. And people are kind of waking up to that and realizing, this is not just some isolated event. Like, I am a member of the polity who has a voice to say, we have got to stop enabling these things, because it's my DA who's letting the criminal go. It's my school system that's encouraging kids to act like cats, or to for boys to dress up like girls and girls to dress up like boys. And when these people are almost I don't know what the word is, when you're butterflying out these very real effects of their mental illnesses, when they're showing people like, I have a problem, because it's a lot of times the individual can't rationalize it, they can't speak it, but sometimes I tend to think that you know, them going through all of these efforts of saying, oh, I'm a boy or I'm a girl, is really them just kind of signaling, or there's that fun theory about why people like color their hair in these bright neon colors, because it maps onto the animal kingdom of like signaling to others that they're almost like poisonous and not to be affected. There's a whole video on it that you guys should go check out if you haven't seen it already. But anyway, so all of this stuff is kind of manifesting, and instead of saying, hey, we've got a real problem here that we have to deal with, instead we're encouraging it, and people are finally waking up to the fact that like this cannot be allowed in my community. And I think that's where we're starting to see the real pushback.
The last point that I'll make on this, and we'll obviously get further into a discussion about not only this, about the stabbing of Arena in North Carolina, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, whether these individuals are truly the proponents of evil, whether they fall victim to evil. I think that one important takeaway from all of these events that have occurred over the past month is that, yes, these events are terrible and tragic and motivated by evil and sinfulness, but I think that the real evil has reared its ugly head in the form of how people respond to these things. I think that the public response to a lot of these events has shown a lot of people's true colors, and it's nauseating to take in. But I think that that's where you talk about how there's a pattern, and there are all these cultural enablement factors. I think that, yes, there are DAs, yes, there are judges, and there are these, you know, these activists and things like that help create the environment that where these kinds of events come to fruition. But I think that there is this base population in the culture that relishes in these things. People that it feels like so many of them have abandoned their humanity. And when you have someone that's trying to justify the murder of Catholic children at a school, justify the murder of an innocent girl on a subway train, justify the assassination of a political figure that they didn't particularly align with, that it's alarming. It's alarming. I think it's very useful because we're learning a lot about people, about the people that we live with, our fellow citizens and neighbors. But it's also extremely alarming because, you know, we're getting to learn just how a lot of people feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's a consequence of a massive segment of our population replacing religion with politics and making politics their god and their religion, where they just simply become zealots for whatever it is that they believe in. And, you know, whoever, if they, when they see these things happen, right, it's to them divine retribution, and they celebrate it, right? They see it as you know, the chickens coming home to roost, and, you know, whatever it is that they're replacing God with as having that judgment against those enemies. And, you know, that's when you don't have a you know, a true concept of God, right? That's where this leads to. Something's going to fill that void. Man is a spiritual being. We were created as spiritual beings. And if you know, when people talk about that there's a God-shaped hole, I mean, that's going to be plugged with something, whether you want it to be or not, right? And when you're talking about evil, you know, as an entity, that's going to find its way in. And we have taken down so many guardrails as a society to allow those things to happen with much more frequency. I mean, you know, religion by and large has taken a backseat, especially, you know, for anybody who's a baby boomer generation and younger. And, you know, and I think we see that trend reversing, but, you know, there's still a large segment of the population for whom that's very true. We have gotten basically rid of our mental health care. We have dismantled the justice system. All of these things that kept society in line. And meanwhile, you now have people able to go into these niche online communities with other people who are also struggling with these same mental illnesses and just whip each other into a frenzy, right? There's always been people who have been disposed to want to hurt people in the past, right? History has absolutely, you know, its share of killers and people who were simply out to cause as much harm as possible. But those people were generally in an isolate. And a lot of times they were in a community where somebody who might have been predisposed to that was able to have those impulses put in check by society. Those impulses are not only now, or that society that was able to check those impulses has largely collapsed at this point. Meanwhile, people are actually able to find each other who share those similar impulses and push each other's buttons, right? Until somebody does something, until somebody acts out on those impulses, and a tragedy occurs.
Yeah, I think that there's something to the fact that what you're talking about, what you guys were both alluding to, is the reaction from things. Is that what I'm really starting to find, and what I'm trying to draw out in the next video that I have planned for the YouTube channel, is that long ago, but it should be evident now to everybody, that we've reached a point where we cannot meet in good faith these people because we don't have the same ends. And I think the root of that is because we are combating, like I said, real malicious forces who don't share our common goals. And so while all of these things were tragic and evil that they were, you know, while this church, this Catholic school, Catholic church shooting was awful, the people who were coming out and saying you got what you deserved is no better. I mean, it's almost worse. And I think this is why it's become so apparent to me that there is no meeting, there is no middle ground. And, you know, there's that old saying of like, you don't compromise with evil, you destroy it. I mean, we're facing evil. And, you know, like the Charlie Kirk reaction, to jump us up a little bit, has been a lot of like, well, we need to carry on his message. I was like, I can't think of anything more poetic than the guy who still believed in the traditional American values of debating in good faith and finding common value and common cause getting assassinated. I can't think of anything more emblematic than what the problem is that we don't share the same goals anymore. How can you have reasonable, rational, good faith conversations with people who literally want you dead? They say that you not supporting transgenderism justifies Catholic school kids being shot in mass because of your political beliefs. And, you know, this is what happens. It's like what you were getting at there, Adam, was that there were guardrails that existed in society to put these things in check. And when people had real problems, real mental health issues, or real possessions, or whatever the case may be, right, there was a competent and capable body of men in society to meet that threat and deal with it, however it needed to be dealt with, right? Today, there's so many little things that you can get away with up to these most tragic of events, is why we're having so many of them, because all of these little things that a healthy society would recognize and say, hey, that's got to stop, we got to put that in check, is not being stopped. So you cross one finish line, and you cross another, and you cross another, and then it starts snowballing, right? And then you get to a point where a guy thinks it's okay to take his AR-15 to a Catholic mass and shoot up a bunch of kids. And I think that that's the crux of the issue, is it's not enough for the right to look at this and say, well, this is not okay, we can't be shooting up schools. Of course not, right? Well, this is not okay, you know, like gun violence is, of course it is, right? But what's the problem? What's the root of the problem that we need to get to? Because I'm tired of talking about these surface level issues, which is what the right wing has been so good at for the past several decades. What the Republican Party has been so good at is astroturfing these issues into not actually addressing the real underlying problem, because at their heart, I think there's a liberalism about them too, and they don't want to accept it, and they don't want to recognize what the real problem is, because the reality is it brings us back to a religious society with strict guardrails and lateral limits that disciplines the society into virtue, and those who insist on acting outside of that are not welcome in that civilized society.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at, what we've seen this month with the most violent event, I guess, was the Catholic church shooting. The most prominent politically would have been Charlie Kirk's assassination. But it's like we have experienced, I think, like at the national psyche, if you will, having seen all this violence unleashed in such a short period of time, and the kind of like political nature of it, being like transgender and like shooting Charlie Kirk and being like a political, like you said, a political person that promoted debate and dialogue. And I see this as kind of like a wake up call that we're way far down the line from where these problems began. And we're way past like talking about symptoms or something. It's like that we're looking at like violent breakdown. That is the end result of like decades of the breaking down of the family, breaking down of marriage, breaking down of religious values, breaking down of sexual mores, breaking down of even like basic concepts of decency. And so, we're already living in a society now that is like so thoroughly atheistic and materialistic. And as the point's been made, that the political has replaced the religious. And it's been bad for a long time, but I think it's like coming to a head from many different avenues. But I think that a lot of people are seeing that and realizing that. And so I think you're seeing an even further polarization as a result of that. Like you're seeing a lot of people go, oh, like becoming like who've maybe never been religious before, so thinking like, well, I dismiss this, but maybe I need to give Christianity a chance. But at the same time, you see a hardening on the left, the people saying, the world's like, we all kind of understand the world's messed up, but the people on the left are saying it's because of these Christians and capitalists, and they're pointing their finger in that regard, and they're like, something has to be done, and so they're acting. They're leftism has always been inherently violent. Really, it's like it's a revolutionary movement. So it's you kind of like milquetoast liberal, but really the milquetoast liberal is just sitting there going like, well, you guys shouldn't do that. But then when they do it, they go, oh well, you got what you deserved. And it's always been like that. If you study the Russian Revolution, it was very similar.
Right.
The talking head class basically just said, yeah, that's what's happening. And I think we're seeing a kind of mirroring of that.
And if you go back to Russia, there was a lot of the lower of the nobility. They actually cheered on the revolution because they thought it was going to save them in the end, right? They were like, "Oh, we've been with you guys the whole time," and in most cases, that did not work out for them. But yeah,
Exactly.
You had the elite class in Russia. People who were not all the way at the top, but the people close to it. They're sort of analog of our Hollywood, types. They cheered it on, and they did not weather the storm as they thought they might. Right? You always hear the saying, "Liberals get the bullet too." That's how it went down in during the Russian Revolution. So
that's exactly the point I'm trying to make.
Lessons to take from that. But I mean, even as our country, like we've been sort of in this spot before. I mean, Charlie Kirk's assassination is probably the most important political assassination since the death of Martin Luther King, right? Because I mean, Ronald Reagan, I mean, that was a big deal, but he survived against all odds. Ronald Reagan survived, but when this happened, Martin Luther King was assassinated. For some context, like the summer of 1967 was really sort of the peak of racial tension in America. That was when there was the most race riots, most cities destroyed. 67 was a really bad year. Martin Luther King was assassinated the year after that. There was some flare up after. There was some riots. There were some things about the week after, but things could have gotten really bad, right? I mean, you could have had, after the death of Martin Luther King, like an all-out race war, and a lot of people would have seen that as being totally justified if they did that. But both sides calmed down. Both sides were like, "This isn't who we are." Right. You had a lot of the people in the civil rights activists say, this is not what King would have wanted. And that side calmed down. You had a lot of the holdouts within the South who said, yeah, this isn't what we wanted either. Maybe this civil rights thing, we can give this a chance. And you actually had the nation come together. They were ready to heal. I mean, a lot of people were ready to put segregation behind them by that point, and were ready to become an integrated nation. And they did, right? At that point, we were ready to heal. And yeah, there were definitely some flare-ups between now and then. And King's assassination did not go down totally peacefully. But by and large, we were at a turning point then, and we made it. But there are so many different things now, because America at that time, they were ready to heal. I don't feel like we're at that point now. It's different, and it's all on one side, right? That is being very honest about, yeah, we just kind of want to have the opposition put against a wall.
Here's a perfect supporting example of what you're talking about. Okay, you have Hassan Piker, one of the most popular Twitch streamers. The CEO of Twitch says that he loves him. Opens up his stream in the last couple of days. I don't remember what day it was specifically, and he's singing Bella Ciao. Okay, that's not a random occurrence. That's not just something doing it because he thinks it's funny or it's glamorous. He is doing it because of what the shooter wrote on the bullet. The shooter that killed Charlie Kirk. Bella Ciao was carved into one of the bullets. This is not a bug. This is a feature of the hyper left movement, liberalism's movement, whatever you really want to call it. The violence is baked in. It's in the terms and conditions of what they actually want. The difference between the cultural climate now versus what it was in the late 60s and early 70s is that I still believe that even on both sides of the political spectrum 50, 60 years ago, people had disagreements about the direction that they wanted to take America in. But no matter who you talk to, Democrat or Republican, it seemed to be that the general consensus is what everybody wanted, what was best for America. They wanted the country to thrive. They wanted people to be happy. They wanted workers to be to get the wages that they were deserving of. They wanted people to raise families. They all believed in America. What you have now, especially now, it's so brazenly obvious after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, is that there are people that hate America, and they have no problems telling you that. They despise this country. They hate everything that it stands for. They hate the people that build it. They hate all of the history. They hate the leaders. They hate the statues. They tap dance on the graves of people that are murdered. The video that Sam Hyde did after the shooting about Charlie Kirk as well, I think was extremely powerful. I think as a sidebar, I think Sam Hyde weaves in comedy and poignant political commentary in a way that very few other people can do. But it's what they were willing to do to Charlie Kirk, who is largely regarded as the nice guy. I don't mean to use that term pejoratively. He was a nice guy. He was a good man. He believed in debate. He believed in sitting down across the table from you, having a conversation with you, and he could walk away and he'd shake your hand afterwards. His whole thing was, let's argue in good faith. And what did they do? They shot him in the neck. They murdered him in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, in front of his wife and in front of his children. So, and there are now people that are celebrating it. So I think that the turning point that we're at now, ironically named, is that we are really grappling with large swaths of people that do not want this country to succeed. They want to see it burn, and they don't care, who dies. And I think a lot of people, like you just mentioned, Adam, is that they think that they're a part of this movement. But if this purported movement were to succeed, I think they would find themselves in a very, very awkward situation down the line if they gain any more cultural ground. I think that the left over the past 50 or 60 years has done very, very well in terms of moving the cultural overt window in their direction. It was one piece at a time, one piece of legislation at a time, one social movement, one cultural uprising at a time. And we've gotten to the point now where you're heralded as a fascist or an extremist or someone that deserves to be murdered because you might have a controversial opinion, such as, hey, I believe marriage should be between a man and a woman. That kind of rhetoric now, hey, I believe in traditional marriage. Hey, I'm pro-life. I don't think that you should be able to slaughter an infant in the womb. That is the kind of talk that puts you under the guillotine for these people. We talked, Sean, you mentioned good faith earlier. How do you have a good a conversation in good faith with someone who wants to see you murdered because of the things that you believe? I think that we are going to be forced to come to a reconciliation of that point at some time in the near future, and it seems like that point is getting closer and closer based off of the events of the last 4 or 5 weeks.
I mean, I didn't find it surprising, but I found it, I guess, a little bit shocking that they came out with it when those posts from the Michigan Socialist Rifle Association came out earlier this week. And they basically said, yeah, all you libertarians who are always saying the Second Amendment is for everybody who, trained everybody here, you're all a bunch of idiots. We actually hate the Second Amendment. We hate the Constitution. We're arming up in spite of you. and we plan to use these arms to overthrow your racist order. And they're talking to libertarians, right, when they're saying that. So it's,
Wow.
they have really they've shown their true colors within the last few weeks. I mean, I imagine if what happened to Charlie, because I mean, you almost have to go to somebody on the left as influential as President Obama, right? Imagine if, God forbid, President Obama was gunned down in front of his family. Do you think that the reaction on the right would be the same as what we saw with Charlie Kirk? Not even.
Well, just go back to 2022 in the summer of love. Just the pregnant woman stabbing, fentanyl abusing George Floyd gets arrested and dies in the process, and half this country was burning for weeks. I mean,
that's actually an extremely good point. And this, I think, this highlights some of the structural problems that exists on the political right. Is that the left does not care about you. They do not care about your families. They do not care about your religion. They will steamroll you. They will put you in the grave, and then they will tap dance on it when they're done with it. But the right, it seems like whenever they gain any semblance of power, especially in modern times, they will break their arms off, patting themselves on the back, talking about how great it is that they're taking the high road. And it's always that same old, well, we wouldn't like it if they did it to us, so we're not going to do it to them. And I mean, that's all well and good. Yeah, sure. But again, there are people that they want to kill you. They want to kill you for what you believe. And it just seems like that we can't get anybody to care about that fact.
I mean, that's a big point that like Curtis Yarvin's always making, is like the right doesn't know how to wield power. And if we want change, we have to learn. And like the left is like a master of it. And it's like we have to change our approach and our strategies to actually take power and use it to achieve our goals. And we've lost. I mean, here we are. We're at the end. Like we were talking about the 60s. I mean, that's not a separate movement. We were infiltrated by communists. I mean, you can go down a lot of different rabbit holes about the 1960s leftism, but that movement didn't just like fizzle away. That set up like the entire basically intellectual class. The cathedral.
It was a foothold. They set up a foothold into the long march against our institutions.
Yeah. I mean, more than a foothold. I mean, that's when they basically took power, and it was just incubating. I mean, it's like, yeah, we got Reagan in, but I mean, really, liberalism had seeped in, and it was just incubating for a decade or two. And now you're seeing like the result of it, because the culture was taken over in the 60s. And I think that, like people unfortunately just like it took this long, I guess, for like a lot of people just to even wake up. It's like,
I think
it's not going to change very easily. There's going to be we have to like have political strategies and cultural strategies and preaching of the gospel to turn this country around. And it's going to require like a lot of organization and strategizing.
I think the reason why the mass wake up call hasn't come until now is because even though the left did basically gain a stranglehold over this country, the communist secularist influence into the institutions, the general structure remained, right? So even though they came in and they subverted it and they overtook it, that general structure of Americana still existed. But the reality is, going back to what you were saying earlier in the call, was the leftists are the eternal revolutionary, because in many ways they are the embodiment of that malevolent demonic force, which is the eternal revolutionary. There is only one order, and that's the order of God. So if you're not under that order, you are in turn revolted against it, right? And so this is that physical manifestation of that through leftism. And they revolted against the culture that existed. They put their people in the power, and they kind of went in this long march to the institutions. And now we're left with the fact that everything has been hollowed out, and there's this shallow husk of a country that's left. And so what's there left to revolt against except for the country itself, which goes back to what Gino was saying, which is that is a staple of what their movement is to be against the United States. It's not about, oh, this is what I want the vision of this country to look like. This is not the direction. It's, I want the idea and the existence of this country to cease. Not because they have some grand idea about what needs to be built in its place, because they don't, because they are destroyers, they are revolutionaries, but because the structure still exists, because there's this identity of Americana that people can still cling to, that identity has to be wiped out. That identity has to be assassinated on a college campus in front of people. That identity has to be shot up in a church in a church in the morning. That identity has to be stabbed in the neck on a metro. That identity has to be firebombed. I mean, any number of things, right? This is about destroying the last vestige of identity, and it's the most key part of the entire process, because it's now when it's become evident to everybody who has been comfortable denying what's really going on, can't deny it anymore. They can't unsee Charlie Kirk getting assassinated on TV, or that poor girl getting stabbed on the train. They can't unsee these things. And so the identity that they thought that they had is being undone right before their very eyes. And so what happens next, right? I think of like the situation that this country is in, and why today is so different than the late 60s is because in many ways, this country is like a rubber band, where we're stretching this rubber band as far as we can take it, right? We're stretching it. We're doing more to deteriorate the composition of that rubber band, to deteriorate the composition of this country. And eventually you pull it to a certain point, one of two things happens. It snaps back or it breaks. And I think that's what we're seeing. In the late 60s, there was a lot of things going on, but we were only just starting to stretch that rubber band. Now, like you guys have been saying, today we're seeing the results of decades of leftism, and it's destroying this country. It's destroying its identity. So now we're at this inflection point. How much further can we stretch this rubber band? And if we do keep stretching it, which it seems like we're headed in that direction, we're at the point of maximum tension right now with major political assassinations and indiscriminate violence. Is it going to snap back, or are we going to retain the rubber band, or is it going to break? And we're just going to have a flimsy piece of rubber with no identity and no purpose anymore. Because once that rubber band breaks, it's no longer good for holding things together, right? And I think that that's a kind of a good metaphor in my eyes to kind of see where this country is at. And I think that ultimately becomes the conversation is like, well, where is this going to go? Are we going to snap back, or are we going to break?
Yeah, I think I get. I'm sure you guys have heard of like I forget who wrote the book, but like, you know, they talk about the fourth turning or whatever. I feel like that's probably, that seems to be a good description of like what we're in right now is like, you know, they have these generational movements, and the fourth turning is usually kind of almost like revolution, or like some big conflagration happens and that generation has to overcome it. And it seems like that it is predicted for now. So it seems like that's what we're in.
The other situation that we're in now that we weren't faced in the late 60s, which might also be the reason why we were able to cool the temperature down back then that we can't now, is the financial situations, right? Back then, things were generally financially good. They didn't have the same level of access to things that we do today, right? They weren't able to stream Netflix for 25 hours a day, but things were relatively good. The middle class was strong and healthy. There was, you know, a low poverty rate. Indiscriminate violent crime didn't really exist. There was a healthy number of marriages and family rearing, and there was hope and aspiration of prosperity into the future. You don't see that with younger generations today. You see a record number of levels of anxiety and depression. Excuse me. You see a decline in the middle class. You see an increase in the age of marriage, increase in the age of, or a decrease in the number of kids that are being reared, which, you know, I'm not a father, so I can't speak to it personally, but I know we have a couple of fathers here. I would like to think that once you have kids, it gives you a very clear direction and purpose for your future as far as building things. So with less of that, I think people are less and less inclined to consider building for prosperity for the future. And I think obviously if you're working 2 or 3 jobs like some young people are, especially young people with families that are trying to keep food on the table and keep the lights on and all these things. I mean, suddenly like these radical ideologies you start to entertain, whether it's far right or far left or wherever you fall, wherever your dispositions are, you're starting to entertain these more extreme things because you're realizing the system as it exists today is not taking care of your basic necessities, right? And this kind of goes into that whole Chinese principle of the mandate of heaven. Is like, you know, when these big Chinese dynasties lost the mandate of heaven, it often coincided with a lot of the people not being able to meet their basic needs: food, housing, shelter. And so I think that's a key difference today, is young people do not have the same prosperity and economic outlooks, in general, you know, cultural outlooks that people in the 60s did. And so there's not a lot of incentive to turn down the temperature, even though we can all objectively look at it and say, this is going to be bad, right? This is going to be tragic. Just like, you know, in many ways, a forest fire is not good, but sometimes forest fires are necessary in a terrible kind of way in order to clear things out and make room for new growth. And so I kind of wonder if that's where it's at. I don't personally have a lot of faith that the current institutions are going to be able to somehow preserve things as they are and get things back on track, because they seem very self-interested. The American empire seems more interested in itself, and the American nation has kind of been thrown to the side for the sake of the empire. And of course, the empire is only benefiting those at the very top, which is a common leftist argument that you hear. And it's, to a certain degree, it's true, right? When you see people like Nancy Pelosi making tons of money off stock trading, because we know how she's getting those tips. You know, when you see these major banking institutions and hedge funds lopping up all of the available real estate because they're able to outcompete the average middle class family for, you know, a 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath home, that becomes a problem. So people start looking at that, and then they start to see all this waterfall effect of all these other problems that are happening, and they say, maybe those Catholic kids did deserve it, because this country won't allow me to be transgender, or, you know, take the opposite side of the coin. Whatever that would be, maybe whoever, you know, deserved it, and this country needs to be burned. This is what I see as kind of is developing. And I don't know, I'll turn it over to you guys to see if you're seeing the same thing, or if you feel like we're kind of headed in a different direction. Because I am hopeful in the long run, because I know God always wins, but in the short term, I think, kind of like what you were saying, Mike, I feel like we are heading for that fourth turning inflection point. I don't see any signs that are saying otherwise.
I think the important part of what you said, the objective reality, is that young people, millennials, younger millennials, older Gen Zs are starting to enter the workforce. They're leaving home, most likely to rent. They don't have the same advantages and opportunities afforded to them as generations past. I think that they are facing a lot of economic anxiety and uncertainty. And whether you're talking about far left or far right, you're spot on. I think people are looking for something different. And we see what the people on the far left that want something different, we know what their motivations are. We know what drives them. We know what actions they're clearly willing to take at this point to exact that change. However, on the right, it still seems to me like it's in the pressure cooker, because and I think that there's evidence to support this. I don't remember if it was a Gallup or a Pew Research poll, but they're talking about Gen Z support for Donald Trump over the course of this year has dropped by a number of points. And a lot of people on the left are celebrating that, because they take that at face value, and they say, well, look, the youth isn't with the Republicans. It's not with the right wing. It's not with the GOP, whatever you want to call it. The left is unhappy, or the young people are unhappy with Republicans, with Trump, with the right. And they're right, but they're not right for the reasons why that they think they are. I think that they fail to read a lot of context here, and the people on the right are unhappy with Trump because Trump isn't delivering what they want. So they're going to try and stretch the rubber band farther. So I think that as a lot of our peers grow up, as they start to obtain jobs and look to settle down and create families, they're going to try and shape the world into a one that they want to be a part of, into one that they want their children and grandchildren to be able to inherit. And it looks very, very differently than what people on the far left want. But I still think that there's a large generation that's coming up on the right that's unhappy in the same ways that the far left is unhappy, but I don't think that they have achieved the institutional power necessary to make those changes yet.
Well, I think that, like, going back to the rubber band example, like, the snapback scenario to me is the right doing something, because, you know, you consider, like, what makes up the body of the right wing is not the same person that makes up the body of the left wing, right? There is not going to be a long march through the institutions for the right to take power. And there's plenty of historical precedent that shows the differences between how the right establishes power and order and how the left does. The right is the rubber band snapping back if they go that way, right? And I think you see this with, like, I think you kind of see, like, the French Revolution, I think, is maybe a good example coming out of the kind of the chaos of the leftist, the leftist liberal uprising, and then you kind of have Napoleon form out of that. And you get this very right wing authoritarian response. You kind of get the same thing in, you know, when Hitler is brought to power in 1933, kind of answering to the chaos that Germany was experiencing in the 20s. You know, you go on and on and on. Caesar, right? So I think that's what the snapback could be if it happens, because the average right winger, you know, the blue collar plumber or auto mechanic or, you know, engineer or whoever, is not going to be thinking about things like, oh, I've got to go become a professor at the university and slowly start to embed my ideology. And there'll be some like that. I don't want to discredit, but the large majority are not going to be doing that. They're going to be thinking, I need to pick up my rifle and basically protect and defend what I hold to be my values. And I think they're capable of that. And I think that's been some of the discussion recently is the left is a lot more prone to violence, but the right is a lot more capable of it. But the restraint is there on the right that is not there on the left, because just by nature of having conservative principles, you have a higher development of discipline and restraint for these things, and probably because you know what that means when you start to go that route. So I think that's part of the danger there. But I also think, on the flip side, part of the danger is I don't think the left realizes that. And I've always been of the belief that your average right winger is much better is much more capable of putting himself in a left winger's shoes than vice versa. I don't think that your average left winger has near the ability to put themselves in the shoes and in the mind of a right winger, and really see things from their perspective. I think there's a couple. I can't remember the girl's name, but she was on the Tucker Carlson podcast, and she was part of the Young Turks, whatever her name is.
Sarkeesian.
Anna something, right?
And Kasparian?
Kasparian.
Yeah. So Anna Kasparian, like, I'm not sitting here saying I'm a fan of her. I mean, she has a lot of views that are completely abhorrent, but I at least think that she's somebody that's kind of willing to be intellectually honest about things. But you don't see that from the average left winger, right? And so I think that's part of the problem, is, like, they don't realize the tension that's building up underneath the surface. And honestly, at this point, it's not even building up underneath the surface. It's really starting to bubble over top to the especially since the Charlie Kirk assassination, say we're done with this, you know? So how many more of these events can happen? How much more can they stretch that rubber band? How much more can they push things until there is some, like, reaction? I think we're already seeing a little bit of it, from the institutional level. And this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, is this kind of cleanup of crime, with Trump going into DC with Liberation Day and cleaning out the homeless and cleaning up the crime, the recent threats of going into Portland and Chicago and all these things. I think this is and this could, for all I know, this could be maybe, like you were alluding to at the beginning, Micah, before we started recording, like, maybe this could be another inflection point, right? What happens when a system of law and order moves into somewhere like Portland and tries to start enforcing laws that aren't ever being enforced in a place like that, right?
It's more than law enforcement. I think it's a Marxist tactic. You know, it's not a coincidence they have high crime. It's actually like a branch of leftist militia, essentially.
Sure.
Like, they want a disorder, chaos on the street. They want people scared. That's why they went after people so hard during, like, the 2020 riots, was like, you know, if you even defend yourself, you'll be prosecuted.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen this over and over again. They want you scared to even try to defend yourself. And
Yes.
so for Trump to send like armed forces in there to like clean it up is a frontal assault. It's like they're saying, here, we got this. This is our like violent tactic that we are wielding, but we're doing it in like a plausibly deniable kind of way. Like, what do you mean? These are just criminals. Like, what do you mean? There's just 6 million like Mexicans protesting in the street with Molotov cocktails. Like, what do you mean? We don't know how they got here. So for Trump to go in there like with military and remove them is, in some ways, like, going hot. It's like
Forcing the issue.
on force. Yeah, it's like it's not just about crime.
Yeah.
It's a
Here's-
physical engagement on the right versus the left, really.
I'm looking at a tweet here from Nicholas Kristof. He is a New York Times columnist. So if that tells you anything about the kind of person that he is. So he says, President Trump has dispatched federal troops to what he calls war-ravaged Portland. Portland has its problems, but it is not the hell Trump claims. It remains a food and wine heaven. Hell does not serve Pinot Noir this good. I suspect Trump is sending troops mainly to see if he can provoke violence to distract from his messes and justify his authoritarian rule. So the best part of that is hell does not serve Pinot Noir this good. So you can turn a city over to a literal zombie apocalypse, and as long as affluent boomers can have their little treats, they'll act like there's no problem, and they think it's weird that you even care about psychotic hobos, drug addicts, and Antifa goons.
I mean,
Yeah.
talk about.
I can also go downtown and get a wonderful meal, but at the same time, I don't want to. I do want to, but I won't, because the chance of me getting knifed by a schizophrenic homeless man is very high. And I think that kind of leads to another point, is when you're talking about the relationship between the right and the institutions, right? You see the right trying to escape from them. And I don't necessarily think that that's the best thing to do long term, right? Where I would like to be able to take my family to the city and to admire the old architecture and to go to the museums and to do all of these things that are the cultural inheritance of Americans. But I can't do that because it's simply not safe to do it. I would like to send my kids to public school to be educated with their neighbors, but I can't do that because the public school sucks, right? It's like I want to be a part of these institutions, and trying to escape them. I don't know what the long term. I mean, they're going to collapse in on themselves for the most part. I mean, that's the only possible outcome from this happening. But like, I don't want to run away from the institutions. But things are so bad that I want to send my kids to a great college. I don't think I'm going to do it. I mean, it's just things are so bad at every level that the institutions no longer serve the purpose that they used to. So do we let these collapse and the motivation to rebuild them when they do collapse, I don't think is there. And I think that's ultimately going to be a bad thing for everybody. I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts on that.
So I have an interesting point to support exactly what you're saying. I think a lot of people share your sentiment when it comes to public institutions. I think about public schools specifically. There are lots and lots of people that want to that would love to participate in these public institutions, because I think generally they once were a good thing. However, if you look at public schools in a lot of these states where they offer these educational savings accounts, where they let the tax dollars follow the kids to whatever system of schooling that the parent chooses, whether it's homeschool, charter school, private school, virtual school, Catholic school, whatever you want to call it, people are exiting when given the opportunity the public school system in droves. And it seems like that in a lot of these places, you think that, well, if you look at it from a business perspective, hey, my company, my public school system is hemorrhaging customers for competitors. You would think that they would have this sense of urgency where they need to say, we need to improve our product. We need to change our strategy. We need to have better marketing plan. We need to have stronger employees. We need to have better employee outreach. We need to have better public outreach. You think that they would look at this, but instead it feels like a lot of these institutions, because they are in such a stranglehold by leftist ideology, it feels like that they're doubling down in a lot of ways. And I think that a lot of them feel comfortable doing that because they have the the backing of the state in many cases. A lot of state constitutions require that the government fund a robust and sufficient public school system. So they feel very, very comfortable there. A lot of states are grappling with their state board of educations. A lot of state board of educations refer to themselves as the fourth branch of government, which is often free from accountability and completely unchecked, whether by the legislature or public votes. So I think that we're coming to the point now where people are starting to get the opportunity, and this is in reference to public school stuff specifically, as an institution. People, when they get the opportunity to exit them, they do. I feel like a lot of people feel like they have to participate in them because they have some sort of sense of loyalty and commitment to their community, which I think is generally an honorable thing to have, or they can't put their kids in the schooling option that they want because, hey, both parents have to work a job because they need to be able to keep the mortgage paid, or they can't afford the Catholic school that they would like to. They want to homeschool, but they just don't have the option. So I think that institutional recapture is really, really important. And I know a lot of dissident right people want to, exit the institution game entirely, totally abandon it, and return to monkey, and they want to go play with sticks in the woods and stuff. And I mean that's cool, I guess, if you want to do that. I think that's in some cases fine, but big picture, it's not going to stop these people from trying to suffocate you and snuff out your way of life, literally and figuratively. So retreat, I mean, I guess I get why it appeals to some people. It may feel easier to just throw up your hands and say, you know what, you guys can have it, forget it, we're all going home. But I think that we, as people who want to see this country succeed, who want to see our institutions succeed, must find ways to meaningfully participate in them and start to claim them back, or it's gone, or we lose everything forever.
So this
let me
is
speak to that. So yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, but I think you also have to look at it. There's like different ways of recapturing, and like sometimes it looks like you don't recapture the exact same institutions. Like there's competing institutions. It
right.
didn't happen historically. I've listened to some interesting stuff where they were talking about this. Like, it used to be like, the Scottish universities were way more prestigious than like Cambridge and Oxford. And then it like flipped back again. And I think this is tied to competence as well. So like, you see, it's not just that like, well, people don't want to send their kids to the public school. It's like, well, they're incompetent. Like if you send your kids to the public school, they'll get brainwashed into Marxism and not learn what they need to learn. Meanwhile, I'm homeschooling my kid in classical education, and they're like leagues ahead of their public school counterparts. So it's like, on the one hand, yeah, I've like ceded that institution to you, but like in the meantime, I'm like rebuilding, or I'm going to send my kids to a university that is going to be a conservative university, and like the theory is that I've heard that I think makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like part of like elite theory, is that like that because that institution is competent in teaching competent leaders that go forth, it gains the prestige. So eventually it becomes the prestige institution, whereas the other one turns to shit.
So this
And I
this is
think
like
like that happens across the board with different kinds of institutions as well. So it's like, so it's important that and I think sometimes you're playing into the enemy's hand when like they have the power. It's kind of like, I don't know, I'm going to go work for the New York Times instead of like starting a competing newspaper, or I don't know. I mean, that's maybe a bad example, but you know what I'm trying to say. Sometimes,
well, here's a good
Go
example,
ahead.
because this is really a confluence of like what we would call the Benedict option and the Italian elite theory of elites and counter elites. And so, the Benedict option is really centered, and I know we've talked about this before, but it's really centered around like these Benedictine institutions that kind of created the foundation for Christendom, that built out of the collapse of the Roman Empire and kind of really created Europe as we know it today. And that was because all the institutions at the time had really failed, and like the general zeitgeist had shifted. And so these little pocket communities that were able to be cultural creators out into the future. And then you have Italian elite theory, which is that you never really actually have like a grassroots uprising. You have elites and counter elites. and you might have elites whose interests are aligned with the grassroots uprising, which is what would make that movement successful. But I think to the point of like, you know, going back to like the school example, well, let's flesh that out a little bit, and let's look. This is not even something I wrote down for our notes tonight, but because I forgot all about it. But let's look at the most recent thing with Jimmy Kimmel, right? So Jimmy Kimmel goes and makes some poorly timed comments regarding the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and he gets temporarily canceled for it, quote unquote canceled. I call it consequence culture, not cancel culture, because it's different, because we have an objective end game and they don't. So he kind of reaps the consequences of that. Well, Jimmy Kimmel is not getting a significant amount of views. I mean, think about the amount of money that is poured into that show to keep it running. And he is like not even matching the views that you would get from like a conservative commentator by like Mark Dice, who does videos on his laptop in his kitchen, right? Not even close. So you do have this institutional stranglehold by the left, but I think that's a good example of like, you do have this kind of counter institution, counter elite that we might not be so willing to recognize until we start to look at it and say, oh no, there is real institutions being formed here. I mean, people are not tied to the standard mainstream media channels anymore for their news information. They're going to these independent sources that are kind of bubbling up to the top based on their competence and capability. And that, I think, is what's starting to form these new institutions. But I think there's still a process that we have to go through for these people to realize that they are becoming the new voice, the new elites, and the new institutions. And we really start to have an idea of like, oh, these old institutions aren't going to exist like they used to because they're failing.
I think that's a good way to look at it, where it's, if you envision these institutions as this this ethereal sort of existence. I'm not talking about, you know, oh, I'm going to run for school board so I can reclaim control of this physical building. I'm talking about the existence of education as a cultural staple. I'm talking about the existence of the media. Talking about the existence of politics. Institutional recapture can happen, and we can succeed through these almost free market type elements, where you start introducing viable competition, and competition, as we know, drives down prices and can increase the quality of the labor or service or product that you're offering. So I think that the right type of investment in these so-called competitors, I think, can lead to a recapture of these institutions without necessarily saying, hey, I'm an extreme right-wing person and I became president of this particular state university.
I mean, to draw out another metaphor, I would maybe relate it to like a medieval siege in some ways, where it's like, at the end of the day, maybe our end game is to capture these institutions, but what we've done is we've cut off their funding, their viewership, their whatever, right? Like you would in a medieval siege. You don't necessarily have to send guys over the walls and take the city block by block, although sometimes that happens. But a lot of times these sieges were won just by being able to stay out there for months and cut off the supplies going into and out of the city. And eventually the people of the city become so desperate, the situation becomes so stark that they surrender the city, and then you just walk in and you take it. And I think maybe we could be seeing that situation as we're building such a successful network outside of the institutions that they exist in now because of this kind of technological revolution and our ability to adapt it quicker than the old institutions were able to grab on. And so we've got that head start on them. And now they're losing their credibility, they're losing the gravitas, and we are gaining ground in that cultural front. And eventually there's going to be, somebody's going to have to wave a white flag, right? And when that white flag is waved, we as the right perhaps can just kind of walk into these institutions and take them, right? We just put people, like, who knows what that's going to be, right? I don't know what that white flag moment is going to be or that rubber band moment's going to be, but eventually I think it comes to the point where it's like, okay, but we just go ahead and we put it, we restart fresh. We still have the school board, right? We still have our public education system, but it looks way different than it looked like in 2020, right? Totally different ballgame. And I think maybe that's a potential that we could be seeing.
I think going further off of your siege analysis, looking at it through the lens of the siege thing, it feels like, I don't know if we can say that we have claimed total victory. Maybe there can be argument made that we have, but it feels like one of the right's big siege wins over the last decade or so has been this battle against wokeism. It feels like the term is kind of played out at this point, but the point being, 10 years ago, I mean, the bravest and funniest, most popular thing that you could do as a champion of one of the leftist institutions was go out there and say, man, these Republicans are terrible. White people are terrible. Christians are terrible. Every single show, every single commercial, everything was just totally rammed down everybody's throats. And it felt like if you were to say anything against it, well, you were going to get canceled. That's where we were in 2015, 2016. But then the battering ram, Trump, comes along and really rallies the people to the walls. And it seems like now, I mean, if you try and take that same position, if you try and be a 2015 type of edgy liberal now, it seems like you're kind of just going to get laughed at because nobody takes that kind of cultural commentary seriously anymore.
Yeah, and I think a good maybe like lens to look at that through is like public intellectuals. It's like for the longest time there was only like liberal public intellectuals, and going back to like the Italian elite theory kind of idea of things, it's kind of like the real battle is being fought in the minds of the already existing elites. And so it's like I imagine there are factions of elites. Some of them might be people we don't really like Peter Thiel and like Curtis Yarvin and stuff like that. But these guys, but these guys are important and they are influencing things. And I don't think that Trump got put into power just because he was democratically elected. Like there was a powerful faction of people that came together to put him in office, is the way I see it.
Yes.
And but Curtis Yarvin's a good example of that, where it's like this guy was just like some obscure blogger like 10 years ago. And now he's like being interviewed in like the New York Times, and these people are still like terrified of him. He's not necessarily our guy, but like he is an interesting thinker. But that's just a good example though of how like right wing think. I didn't, I went to a conservative college, and I didn't even have a conception that there was such a thing as like a right wing intellectual tradition. I mean, that's pretty sad. And so, I mean, I think the average person certainly didn't think that, especially like 10 years ago. It was like to be intellectual almost like just meant to be liberal or left. And so I think that by seeing the rise of fairly popular right wing thinkers that are being trotted out even in the liberal media because they have to, because by not interacting with these people, or even like a Jordan Peterson type character, like these people are out there having a very powerful influence on the minds of the public and of fellow intellectuals, and because of that they're wielding tremendous power, and they're like a harbinger of a bigger movement coming behind them, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even like a character like Nick Fuentes, who lost access to fly on airplanes and keep a bank account, and certainly wasn't going to be projecting his podcast on any platform except the one that he had to build on his own, is now being kind of brought out into the open and having these conversations. I mean, it's like, so it is a wild shift, whatever you think about him, just to show how different things are now.
Well, I mean, he's dangerous. The fact that they tried to shut him up just shows that how dangerous he is. Like whether you like him or not, he's an extremely effective or what's the word I'm trying to say? Like orator. Yeah. So it's like, and you think back in even times like ancient Greece and stuff, like oratory was power. And so, if you let someone, you have ideas, and supposedly, in this liberal idea, like, oh, it's a marketplace of ideas and stuff. But the left has found that they cannot compete in the marketplace of ideas. Like if you let the right talk and it gets broadcast into everyone's living room, they lose power. They saw that with Trump. They recognized it and they said, we're not going to do this. And they put the kibosh down, but now Trump's back in power. And so I do think that's one like avenue that we're winning at. And it like might be the most important battlefield to win on is having serious intellectual firepower and being able to broadcast it. And that's traditionally been something the left has had a stranglehold on. That's part of the cathedral. I mean, they controlled the cathedral, or we know who else controls it. So
them losing that is what they're more afraid of than anything. Because I remember back when I was in like high school and college, one of the first sort of commentators that I started listening to was Stefan Molyneux. And
I remember
one of like the smartest guys, right, I had like ever heard up to that point. And very not, I mean, he was more of a cultural commentator than anything, but he was not very political, and he certainly wasn't offensive. Yet he was one of the first people to get banned from like every platform when they started cracking down on this stuff. And that really opened my eyes. I was like, they don't want anybody, right, with a sort of classical liberal bent at all, because that's what they're afraid of. They're not mad about the Mark Levins and the Rush Limbaughs of the world. Those guys are just gonna, they're really, really scared of these a conservative public intellectual capturing I would say the top 20% of the youth who are right leaning. That's what they're more afraid of than anything. Somebody who can speak to those people, right? The college, the sort of college educated or capable sort of doing that level of thinking. They don't care about Rush Limbaugh spouting off, all he can. Those people don't bother them. It's really those on that intellectual side of things that really, really concerns them. And, as the right has moved from sort of that, Rush Limbaugh talking to the blue collar guy back in the 90s to really being, sort of refinding this right-wing intellectual tradition that had really been ignored since like the 1950s and possibly even before. The rediscovery of that's happened since sort of like 2014. That's been scarier to the left than I think anything else. And I think you're 100% spot on. That's the way forward, right? And that's how to really put together a movement that's going to be able to replace these institutions. My concern is if we have the capacity and the willpower to do it, right? Do we have enough of these young people who want to go down that path? Because it seems to me that young people are now trying to extricate themselves, at least right-leaning young people are trying to extricate themselves from the system as much as they possibly can, because they see no hope in it. And especially, going back to your point, Sean, economically, they just want to grill, right? They're going to do the thing that makes them the most money. And if that means being an electrician or a carpenter and finding, one of these really shrinking, pathways to being able to actually afford to raise a family, that's how they're going to do it. And that's where we're, a lot of our best and brightest are going down that path. And that's, and perhaps maybe they're making the right decision doing so, but I think losing a lot of that capacity that could be this, sort of a public intellectual type of individual who could start putting the pieces back together when they fall apart.
We haven't even introduced.
Oh, so I was saying there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but I also know, I'm kind of in like the Catholic homeschool world, and I just know like a lot of families that have like several kids that are all just extremely intelligent, extremely well educated. They're all going to college. And so I think, and I look at some of the other kids, like in my neighborhood and stuff like that, they're going to public school, like don't necessarily have a whole family. And they're not on the same level at all. So, I think these kids when I look around, these are the future leaders of America. So I do think you're right that we're in a situation now where like these institutions are crumbling. And so no one wants to go to them. But that's why I think like maybe like a Hillsdale College or something like that. I don't necessarily want to sing their praise either, but like just as an example of like a conservative college that's like fairly prestigious, where there's a big enough segment of the population that fall into this category of, if you look at like the number of the homeschooled, well, and also people going to these like classical academies and stuff like that are being intentionally raised to be leaders. I tell my kids every day they're leaders. I say, I'm leading you to save America. I tell my son that. Like we have conversations about how America's falling apart, and like you and your brother are going to be leading its revival. And so they're like, well, dang, Dad. But I'm like, yeah, but that's it's important. That's why you need to pay attention. So for me and my part, at least, I'm actively teaching my kids to like be leaders.
Right.
even though I'm kind of a loser. But
I think like going back to the shakeup, like what you were getting into, Adam, like we haven't even introduced the overlay of the AI revolution that's happening right in front of us and the demographic crisis that we're also facing. That also goes hand in hand with the economic problems that we were talking about earlier. I mean, it's just a confluence of so many things that is just, there's no certainties in life. There's only probabilities, but there's just such a confluence of things that's pointing to a probability of everything changing over the next 20 to 50 years radically away from what we have now. And I think what we have to realize is why they're so threatened by these people like Stefan Molyneux and Jordan Peterson, not because what they're saying is entirely accurate all the time, right? Or not that every one of these guys that we're mentioning is necessarily our guy. But the common denominator there is that them speaking in the way that they are is rejecting the very thing that gives the Western liberal democracies their mandate of heaven, which is that we are at the end of history, right? That we are Nietzsche's last man. And we're not, right? And so when you start to propose these ideas that are counter to the Western liberal democratic narrative that we've solved it, here we are, it's all, it's all smooth sailing from here, all of this backwater dictatorship and religious institution and monarchy and all that stuff, that's all behind us now because we've got Western liberal democracy. And this is our path forward. Well, when Western liberal democracy starts to fail the people, right? Going back to what I was saying earlier about the American empire foregoing the needs of the American nation for the sake of the people who are at the helm of the empire. When people start to see the cracks in that, and they start to realize, they start listening to these people and realizing, oh, there's alternatives. There's something that's going to meet my needs and my family's needs. That breaks the foundation that this entire institutional narrative is built on. And if you let that seep through, it overturns everything. And I don't see how it does it. And this is started back in the mid 2010s to 2020s. Trump came in and really kicked things off. And now I feel like we're kind of full on in the midst of it. And I don't know where it goes from here, but I think I think it's fairly safe to say that we're kind of riding this wave, if you will. So we've been talking for a little while. I kind of want to start to close things up here a little bit. I think it's been a very good conversation. There was so much more that we could have gotten to. I had in my notes talking about, Israel's public relations tour, which is perhaps just a little bit emblematic of the changing of the tides because, waving the Israeli flag was at one point just as patriotic as waving the American flag. But I think this is a good place to stop it. We've had a good conversation, a lot of speculation about what's to come. And I'm sure that, in coming podcasts, we'll be continuing to observe and commentate on the things as they happen. I pray to God that things aren't as eventful in the coming month as it was this last month. Whatever that saying is, it's a terrible thing to live in such interesting times, right? We're all getting a taste of that, I believe. So what I would encourage to all of you guys and everybody who's watching is just to continue to pray, continue to actively work where you can affect change in your communities. And I also want to end, I don't know if we did this on the last one or not, but with all the tragedies that we've been discussing tonight, I do want to end with white pills, and we'll go around the table just to kind of give a little glimpse of hope, because at the end of the day, we are all men of God. We know that God wins, Christ wins. He will step on the head of the serpent. So why don't we close things out with a positive, and you guys can tell me what your white pill is for the month. And whoever wants to go first, shoot.
I think one of the few, sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. One of the few positive things that I've seen come out of this month, especially in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder, is I've noticed there is a certain degree of unity that the right has achieved that I feel like I haven't seen in a long time. We are and have been a big tent type of alignment where people that were fed up with the other side have come over to ours, and I think that's diluted the message, it's diluted the purpose, and our reasonings for operating the way that we do. But it seems like that there's been a lot of unity that's come, and it's really refocused and revitalized a lot of our people. They remember why we do what we do and just how high the stakes are. And I've also noticed, I don't know if you guys have, but the church pews at every single mass that I've been to since Charlie Kirk's assassination have been filled wall to wall.
That was exactly what I was going to say. I already go to a pretty crowded church. We are now bursting at the seams 3 weeks in a row. Just
standing room only.
There's
They're running out of
all of them
worship
young.
aids.
Yeah.
All of
I
them young,
go to
I'm saying the same thing.
it's particularly powerful for me because the parish that I go to is a university parish, so it's comprised of mostly college students, and it is wall to wall. So that I think that there says no matter what happens, I think that Fulton Sheen said, as the eagle stirs among the young, so does God stir among the nations. And I think it's extremely encouraging that I have to fight for a seat in a pew at Mass.
I caution, right? I mean, there was this feeling of unity. I've heard this described by multiple people. I was too young to really remember it, but as being like a post 9/11 moment. At that time, a large amount of people were really psyoped into doing something that we shouldn't have by going on that war train full speed, right? And carrying on into the Iraq war and all of these things. If you don't support the war, and then they change it to support our troops. If you don't support the war, you're not American. But all of these different things that, to rechannel America's righteous anger. I really pray that we see this channeling into a spiritual healing of this nation. Right, we've been here before, and I am very afraid that we're going to see this co-opted by the wrong people. But from what I've seen so far, there's a lot of good coming out of what's happened here, and I pray that this continues and that people are able to act with discernment and really look to the Holy Spirit first before anything else.
Michael, what you got for a white pill?
I was gonna say the same thing. I said, it really looks like we're experiencing some revival, and you saw all those people. I didn't really watch the whole thing, the Charlie Kirk Memorial, but I saw like some clips, and it was like the whole like stadium was like singing hymns together, and you saw like little clips and stuff of people, like that guy, did that clip with the guy that had his like suit. Like he's some kind of country bumpkin guy. He's like, I ain't never worn a suit before.
Oh,
My wife got me this suit, and I'm gonna go to church. And I'm gonna try to be a better man because of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's kind of a tearjerker.
Yeah.
But I just feel it's kind of hard. You just see these little signs like everywhere, and it really like became palpable this month. Yeah, I mean, especially in the wake of Charlie Kirk. And I think it wasn't just Charlie Kirk. I think it was really like this like rapid succession of these events. It was like the shooting, the stabbing, and then the assassination were like boom, 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 and each one of them was like gut wrenching. And I think that, I felt like just blackpilled until I saw the response to it. Then that was really uplifting. So, but yeah, as a Christian, as a Catholic, I'm like, I think that there's no solution outside of Christ. That's for sure. So, but I think a lot of people are realizing that, like, whether it's faintly or not, a lot of people are like, they had no interest in religion, or maybe they were raised in religion, but they put that away, and they're putting two and two together and going, this is this chaos and this hatred and this malice and this despair. They're figuring out like this is what it looks like when you reject God. Because everyone, I think most people are, not everyone certainly, but a lot of people, at least if you were raised with just in any religion at all, any amount of religion, I should say, raised Christian, but with any, just even just a little bit of instruction and whatever, I think knows that is taught that. They're like, well, without God, there's despair. And people say, and they go chasing after pleasure, and they go, maybe they go to college and they're like, oh, that's not a sophisticated understanding of the world. I'm going to be sophisticated. And that's very tempting. And, I fell into that for a long time. And then but there it is staring you in the face. It never really leaves you. There's the nihilism and despair that's what the world has to offer you without Christ. And people are seeing that.
the malice and tragedy is really staring you in the face. And I think that it is becoming apparent that we're entering an era where you have to pick a side. It is too obvious. You can no longer live comfortably in the middle because of how stark the differences have gotten. And I think that that's where the white pill is. And my white pill is very similar to all of yours in that people are really changing because of this. I've had 4 text conversations with friends of mine in the past couple weeks who have said to me in some degree or another, and reaching out to me out of the blue, people I don't talk to very often, you know, guys that I haven't seen since the military, saying, hey man, I just want to let you know that like I'm going through a process of kind of coming to Christ right now. To get those text messages on my phone, like I mean, it genuinely almost brings me to tears. It stopped me in my tracks, especially to have 4 of those within the same month. It's like unbelievable. And it gives me so much hope, you know, because I'm not going to pretend like I was like the perfect Catholic. I was not the perfect Christian when I was in the military or in my younger days by any means. I made plenty of mistakes that I think about all the time. But I never entirely let go of it. And I didn't realize the way, even just the little things that I was doing, the impact that it had on people in the long term, for them to reach out to me out of the blue like that and tell me that they're reading the Bible every morning, that they've started going to church, you know, guys who used to, you know, laugh at me for going to church on Sunday, which was the bare minimum that I would do. Right. And it's just given me so much hope. And so, you know, if you are in that same position, I would just encourage you guys to realize, you know, those of you who are listening, realize the leader that you are right now. You may not realize it yet. You may not have people texting you, but if you're a living example, there are people who are looking to you right now and trying to see what it is that you're doing, how it is that you're behaving and responding to things as a measure for how they should be starting to orient their lives. Because maybe some of you have been on this journey for a long time now, like many of us have. Many people are not. Many people are only just beginning that journey. So use the lessons and the experience that you have from that to be the absolute best example that you can for these people. Whether you know it, whether you know you're being an example or not, just continue to live in that Christ-like manner, because you never know that the impact that you're going to have. I never could have predicted the impact that some of us are having with as little as we do, the impact that this organization is having, right? So that's what I want the takeaway message to be for tonight, is with all the tragedy, you have the opportunity, you have the option to be the light in the world, and to really bring as many people along with you as possible, so that despite whatever tragedies we've faced, whatever tragedies we may continue to face, that in the long run, we're going to come out on top, and we're going to change things for the better. And most importantly, we're going to lead as many souls as possible to God, to Christ. So I think that is a good place to end. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me tonight. It's been another great conversation. Hopefully we didn't run too long and lose people's attention. Once again, for all of you watching, thank you again for tuning in. We will try to do these more often. I know we don't get to them as often as we do, but if things continue to progress as they do, I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about. If you were interested in becoming a member of the organization, hopefully you saw me repping my new polo tonight. You too can wear one of these sexy polos with the NCM logo on the breast if you become a member. So check out our website. Reach out to us via the links on our website if you are interested in becoming a member. We've got chapters all across the country. We would love to have you. We've been at another major growth stage lately, and the more, the merrier. If you're a competent, capable Christian man and you want to be part of a fraternity that's trying to affect positive change and be around like-minded men, then I would say we are the place for you. So reach out. And if for whatever reason we're not the place for you, find another way to get involved. There's plenty that you can do. We are also going to be starting to sell flags. So I know a lot of the big selling point for this organization is how awesome our flag is, with this logo up in the blue section of the flag and the American flag. I'm sure many of you have seen it by now. So keep an eye out for that as those sales start to go live. And I'm sure there will be many more things to come from us as an organization. So thank you again for tuning in, gentlemen. Thank you again for joining me. God bless, and we will see you all next time.